And I think if you're not wired that way, it's so baffling when you run into a person who
Yes,
is.
that's
You're
right. That's
just
right.
like, what? They
Huh?
can't really lie
Right.
all the time. Well, yeah, they
Right.
can. And they can't really be that self-centered. Oh, sure. Yes, they can.
Right.
So
Right.
it's something that's just when you get blindsided by it, you're so baffled. And it's so hard for a non-narcissistic person to understand and get out from under somebody
Right.
who is like that.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. It's Audley Stevenson back for another edition of hands down the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I appreciate you for being here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. As always, I encourage you to follow us on our social media channels, or you can subscribe to us on YouTube. If you're watching this episode on the YouTube channel, then you know, if you hit that bell down below, ding, 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 you can stay connected to all great things audacious related. Now, Shannon Petrovich is a therapist who helps individuals navigate and recover from toxic relationships. With Shannon's help, we're going to specifically dive into how individuals can overcome these toxic relationships, specifically the narcissistic ones. I always struggle with that word. The term narcissist has been thrown around a lot in conversation over the last several years to describe that someone who does something that's so self-absorbed. But while most people tend to whip out the word when they're ticked off with another person's selfish action, narcissism is actually a mental health diagnosis. It's a real thing, folks. A narcissistic personality disorder is a mental condition where people have an inflated sense of their own importance and a deep need for excessive attention and admiration. Narcissists also tend to have a lack of empathy for others and usually have troubled relationships. Meaning, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, it's probably a rocky one. Now, Shannon has a solid understanding of how to get out of the fog and navigate through a narcissistic relationship, and she's here to enlighten us with some insights, information, and very useful perspectives and strategies that can help us, again, get through the fog and get on the other side to a point where we're healthy, thriving, and really living that audacious life. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Shannon Petrovich. Enjoy. Hey, Shannon, thank you for being here with me on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Audley. I'm really excited about it.
Yes, and I'm excited that we're able to connect. We had some mishaps before trying to make it all work, and but we persevered, and your persistence made it happen. So there we go. So thank you for doing so. Very eager to get into your work as a therapist and how you work with individuals to recover trauma. And specifically, you focus on narcissistic relationships and also all the baggage and stuff that comes with that. I'm wondering, maybe as a starting point, if you can frame and give our listeners sort of an idea of the sort of work that you do and kind of what do you see in people when they come through these situations and they come to you?
Yeah, thanks, Audley. It's been quite a journey. I've been a therapist for 35 years, and about 5 years ago, I thought I really wanted to share with more people in a broader way. And so I started a YouTube channel called Therapist Talks.
Yep.
And in the process of sharing a lot of different mental health information and strategies and perspectives, the focus really became narcissistic relationships, because that's what everybody was really, really needing to hear about and wanting to know about. So the more they asked, the more I produced, and that became really the focus. And then I decided I really had to pull it all together into some sort of framework that would help people actually get well, people who have no access to therapy, which is really most of the people in the world really are not going to ever have access to therapy, sadly. So I pulled together this book, Out of the Fog into the Clear, journaling to help you heal from toxic relationships, and have really made that my mission to share with people how to identify with and understand what's going on inside of yourself, what dragged you into the fog, and how to get clear.
Were you surprised? You said you heard from your viewers of the YouTube channel, and they sort of channeled you in this direction. Were you kind of surprised to see so many people, how many people are dealing with these types of relationships?
I was totally surprised. When I started, it was really on the heels of some very high profile suicides. And it really occurred to me that so many people in the world don't understand depression and anxiety, and there's just rampant across the globe, and nobody understands how to get well from that. And so I thought it would be on that. And those were had some interest, but it was really the relationship stuff that people kept coming back to. And I had started my work in domestic violence field way back 30 years ago. So I think my first video about that was domestic violence, narcissistic rage in action, and that one blew up. And so I thought, whoa, I guess people need to hear about this. So then I did more about that. And then the questions came in the comment section. What about this? What about that? And so I just kept kind of feeding that that audience, and it just blew up more and more. So I thought, gosh, this is really what people are struggling with the most. And I think if you're not wired that way, it's so baffling when you run into a person who is. You're just like, what? They can't really lie all the time. Well, yeah, they can. And they can't really be that self-centered. Oh, sure. Yes, they can. So it's something that's just, when you get blindsided by it, you're so baffled. And it's so hard for a non-narcissistic person to understand and get out from under somebody who is like that.
In my perspective, I always thought the spectrum of a narcissist is quite broad, and there's so many different areas that individuals can slot within. And so, maybe they're not the type that are always lying, but they can still be quite controlling, as an example, right? So it seems that there's a lot of not so great qualities that fall into the lap of a narcissist, it seems.
That's right. And it is a broad range from mild all the way to really severe. And so sometimes the milder versions are really hard to identify. And then the moderates are really good at their game, and it's hard to understand where they're coming from. The severe, most people kind of see those folks and get it, but can get bullied into staying and really have a hard time getting free because they're terrified and they're trauma bonded. So it's a complex field, and I've tried to pick it apart and unpack it the best I can to help people understand it.
Shannon, what would you say is the most, common question or common inquiry you get from individuals who are in these relationships? Is there one, or is it, I'm just curious.
There are a lot, but I would say, how do I get free? And how did this happen to me? And typically it comes out as a really negative statement, like, how could I have been so stupid? And I always, give people a big timeout at that point and say, wait. You got into this relationship honestly, and then the reasons that you got stuck there were because this person was good at manipulating, controlling, being dishonest with you, gaslighting you, separating you from your people, and applying that fear, obligation, and guilt, the acronym FOG, so that you got stuck. and it's really understandable. It's also one of the controlling mechanisms is to play into someone's strengths. So a non-narcissistic person, an empathic person, typically is diligent and committed and loyal and gives you extra chances and trust somebody and believes the best in someone. So those are wonderful qualities. But when you're sharing those qualities with a narcissist, you're a victim.
Right.
So they are using your best qualities against you. And you have to recognize, I wasn't stupid. I was just letting my best qualities be used against me. So that is something that you have to be more careful about, and you have to have good boundaries around, and you have to get your creepometer really up to snuff.
Right. Understood. So for these individuals that are stuck in these situations, or in these situations, you're not stuck, but in these situations, I guess I'm wondering sort of the impact on them and how that, and I imagine would be different for individuals, but what does that look like? Or what would you see if someone's in that situation?
Oftentimes they do get isolated from their usual people, family and friends. The narcissist is going to devalue your family. They're going to devalue your friends. They're going to kind of create that situation of feeling like, hey, it's you and me against the world. And I love you, but you're not really that lovable, but I love you. And so, it's pitting you against your people, but also pitting you against yourself. So as they create this love bombing, cycling with devaluing you and isolating you from others, it creates a situation where you start to devalue yourself. And then their work is kind of done because you're in the process of devaluing yourself and running yourself down. So typically people feel really worse and worse about themselves. They're more and more isolated. They feel really like they're living on the breadcrumbs of what the narcissist gives them,
right,
and starving to death at the same time. So it's a complicated picture. And if you try to say that person's not good for you, they'll oftentimes say, you just don't understand them like I do.
right,
and they'll defend them because they're just so hooked in.
As you're describing it, you image in my mind very much as the state of helplessness, almost, right, where you're just by yourself, and in reality you're never really by yourself. You just end up feeling like you are, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that aloneness and helplessness and hopelessness is what leads to despair a lot of times. And people will often even say that they feel suicidal in the midst of that because they've been so devalued. They feel like garbage and feel worthless and feel like there's no way out. And so there's a lot of despair that happens, and sometimes people will get suicidal. So it's really important to recognize the anxiety, depression, suicidal behavior can be the results of these toxic relationships. It also affects your physical health.
Right.
Stress and constant adrenaline shooting through your system,
right,
destroys your immune system and destroys your physical health overall.
Right. And is that sort of the cycle that kind of that leads to despair and again, suicidal? Is that sort of what the cycle looks like? Or and again, not that everyone's locked into that, but is that generally what we're talking about here?
It is. And then there's the cycling of the relationship, because as soon as you get a little bit wise to them and a little bit like, oh, I need to get out of this, then they hit you with the love bombing and the it's you and me against the world, babe, and we got this, and you can't leave me, and I die without you, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So then you're kind of in that honeymoon, and then it starts to devalue again. So the cycle of the love bombing and devaluing kind of gets you spiraling down into that deep, dark pit.
Got you. Now you referenced FOG earlier. That's your acronym: fear, obligation, and guilt. Why don't you sort of expand on that, and so that because that also is part of the cycle that you referenced, right?
Right. And so oftentimes those fear moments are really small in the beginning.
Mhm.
So when you're doing things the way that person wants you to, then they love bomb you. And then if you do something that they don't like go out with your friends or do something that you want to do or not pay enough attention to them in the way that they want it, then they'll give that little anger, that little tantrumy, or that little drama stuff that kind of makes you behave differently. Those sort of fear moments usually escalate if you don't behave, to
Right.
put it bluntly.
Right.
And so over time, they're training you to act the way they want you to act and do what they want you to do and don't do what they don't want you to do. And they will escalate those fear moments, whether it's drama or anger, because that covert is more the drama escalation and the overt is more that bullying kind of attitude. But they all create that fear inside of you of, oh, I better not do that. And it's almost like internalized so deeply that you don't even realize that's happening.
Right.
If somebody will say, that person is dangerous or too angry or whatever, oh, no, they're fine. And they're never that way to me. And, they'll defend that person. But over time, they are becoming so trained by those anger episodes that they are locked in that fear of not doing what they're supposed to do.
Got you. And then the obligation, is that, where does that fit into this?
Yeah, you get hooked into that obligation of, it's you and me, I need you, I've got to have you, and all of that, you're obligated. When that, and oftentimes these type of people come into a relationship hot. I've even known people to say that, he showed up at the first date with an engagement ring, or,
Wow.
she moved in 2 weeks time,
Right.
and I never got rid of her. And, so they come into a relationship hot, and that feels good. Initially, you think, oh, maybe we are in love. Maybe we were made for each other. But when it starts to unravel and it doesn't feel good anymore, they come in even hotter and say, no, we're meant to be together and it's you and me. So that obligation is really deep and really hard to shake. And they'll pressure you so much that you really believe that that's true.
And so is that where the guilt comes in, that pressure?
Yeah. So the guilt trip can be everything from, see what you made me do is sort of a famous line I like to share, because it's always your fault that they acted badly. So then you're always guilty, no matter what they did, what happened, it's always your fault. So that guilt is just piled on and on and on and on. And the depth of that is just endless. So that guilt keeps you really stuck too, because you think, well, if I just do it better, maybe we'll get back to how we were when we were first together.
Right.
But you're never getting back there, because that wasn't real to begin with. It was just the love bombing and the coming in hot.
Right. It it's just really fascinating how deep this goes. It can go. And so much, someone has got, is being put on them, right? All from this relationship. So my natural line of thinking is, okay, so what does the healing process look like now that you're dealing with all this? Now that you've identified it, what it's doing to, because I would imagine there's a point in time where, all these things are happening and you're questioning yourself. Like, is it just me? Am I the one? Like, and so you go through that kind of process too before you say, okay, it's not me. Like, what's next, right?
Exactly. And that's one of the hardest parts. And when I talk about it right in the beginning of my book to help people understand this, that you have two parts of your brain. Well, we have many parts of our brain, but the two most important parts that I talk about are this little amygdala, this little tiny, I call it the monkey mind, because it's kind of what we share with all the animals. It's fight, flight, freeze, and it all it knows is those three things. And then we have our higher cortex where we can reason things through and think rationally and make good decisions in a rational perspective. When this fight, flight, freeze is going off, this is offline. So it's really important to calm down that monkey mind and calm down that fight, flight, and freeze and take all this information upstairs and reason things through. So when we're caught in the moment of that fear, obligation, and guilt, we're just spinning in that adrenaline all the time. And when people can calm that down and actually use their rational mind and say, wait a minute,
Right.
I feel worse now than I ever felt in my life. Everybody tells me this person is bad for me. So these are the rational thoughts. These are the facts, so just the facts. And when you can line up the facts, and that's part of why I encourage people to journal in my book, is that when you can write this stuff out and say, A, B, C, D, all are facts. They did this, they did this, they did this, and then they did that. And this is how I feel, and this is how I'm doing, and this is how my life has gone out of control. And recognize then that you can make a wise decision using those facts and drag that little monkey mind along for the ride, because it is not going to want to be on board. You are still going to feel attached to that person. You're still going to feel like you're in love with them, and you can love them and leave them. And so that's the crucial piece that a lot of people never get, is they think, well, if I still love them, if I still want to try, then I have to follow my heart. No. You cannot follow your heart with these people, because your heart is trauma bonded and your heart is absolutely hooked. So you have to use your wise mind, make a good decision, and then walk it through. And your heart will come along for the ride eventually.
Right. Shannon, if you don't mind, explain trauma bonded just for those that may not be familiar with that term.
Yeah, so it's the process of what we've been talking about, how the love bombing and then the devaluing and love bombing and devaluing, so that you and isolating and gaslighting, so that you feel worse and worse about yourself over time, and you feel more and more hooked into those little breadcrumbs that you're getting from that person, like they're your only food in the world, and you've got to have those or you'll starve to death, emotionally speaking. So there's that belief that these are your only hopes for any kind of emotional food. So the term was originally coined for actually hostages in connecting to their hostage takers, and the that syndrome, losing the word, but it can happen in these relationships, because in many ways you are a hostage. Yes. The relationship is all about them. It's all about adoring, worshiping, and feeding emotionally their ego. And you don't exist in that relationship. So you are basically a hostage. And when you are trauma bonding to that person over time, you have no ability to emotionally walk through that. You have to calm down that emotionality and make a wise decision, sort of like you would if you were in a hostage situation. Gotcha. You'd have to talk yourself into saying, no, this is the hostage situation, and escaping with, with your rational mind.
Gotcha. Makes sense. You touched on journaling. I was definitely going to ask you about that and the power of journaling as form of healing. I wonder if you sort of expand further on what it actually does for us.
For this process, I think it's really critical, because you're letting your rational mind out of its cage and letting yourself really identify the facts of this relationship and the facts of what's gone on and what's happened to you. And then you can make a better decision. And then we're also going to talk about the toxic relationship you develop inside your own head. So if you talk yourself down all the time, if you're vicious and cruel to yourself inside your head whenever you make a mistake or whenever you're upset, like I talked about before, how could I have been so stupid? Instead, saying, I've got this, I can do this. Right. I'm a good person. I'm going to take better care of who I attach to in the future. I can do this, I can get out. So you've got to become healthier within yourself too. So first of all, walking through the rational facts, then walking
Mm.
through what's the toxic relationship in my own head, and then healing that over time. So all of these things we can journal, and
Right.
it makes it more solid. If you hate to journal, you don't have to do it that way. You can
Right.
talk it out with somebody, but I really think that it's helpful to write things out.
Yeah, because you actually see it, and there's some thought, from mind to pen, right? And as you're writing, and so you're being very clear. And once you see it on paper, I guess it gives you a bit more perspective, right? Like it helps you identify it clearer. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it really does help with your perspective. It
Mhm.
helps anchor the facts, and you can write out the emotions and purge them out of your heart so they don't just spin around. And then you can write out the facts and you can see the difference. I feel like this is the only person in the world. I know that's not true. I
Mm.
feel like I'm going to lose my mind if I let go of them. I know that's not true. I feel like I'm just going to emotionally die if
Right.
I let go of this relationship. I know I can survive this. So when you look at the lies that you're telling yourself and the truths that are real, it helps so much.
Right. And it's yeah. I'm glad you sort of touched on. I know you referenced a couple times the stories that we tell ourselves, because those stories will dig us deeper in this hole than we want to be, or we care to be. And so again, writing them out, it gives you the cold hard facts right in front of you. And I think what that allows you also to do is see this entire scenario for truly what it is, and even the lies that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. And all the lies that they've been telling you too,
Fair enough.
because
Yes.
the gaslighting is really profound. And a lot of times people will get to the point where they don't know what's real and what's
Mm.
true. And writing it out is super helpful. Checking that with somebody that you do care about and that you haven't completely isolated from. And also checking it with what you know to be reality.
Yes.
That's super helpful. So yeah, it can help get clear.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the process of forgiving ourselves. Again, going back to we talked about the guilt. But to get past that guilt, there's forgiveness, and sometimes forgiving our own selves is probably the biggest challenge many face.
It really is. It's one of the harder things, and one of the areas where people devalue themselves the most.
Mm.
And I have heard it so many times. How could I have been so stupid? It's
Right.
not about being stupid. I know so many extremely intelligent people who've gotten sucked into these kinds of relationships and have tried and tried and tried and tried way past what was reasonable to try. But for them, it made sense. It was their heart and soul. It was their own loyalty and determination and commitment that made them keep trying. And I honor that. And I think it's important that each person look at their own character qualities and their own values and honor those. And then at the end of the day, we have to fine tune our creepometer so that we don't get sucked into and attached to people that don't deserve those good qualities. But redefining our sense of self. See, our culture really stinks at this. We think of self-esteem in all the wrong ways. We think
Okay.
that our sense of self is based on our paycheck or our job title or
Yes.
our likes on Facebook or
Yeah.
Instagram or our following. It's
Yep.
so messed up. And so when we have such a fragile and superficial sense of self,
Yeah.
then it goes down the tubes very quickly and easily when someone bruises our superficial ego, right? And so we have to completely redefine our sense of self. We have to go back to the way I think we used to think of our self-esteem, which is our character qualities and our values. And when we're living in our character qualities and values, we can feel good about ourselves. And that's real
Yes.
self-esteem. It isn't, oh, my hair looks great today. It's, I was living my values today. I had a good day. Or I like these things about myself, that I am strong and loyal, and I respect that I care about people, and I'm empathic and I'm
Yes.
compassionate.
Yes.
Those are the things that we should define ourselves with. And when we do
Right.
that, then that's a solid sense of self, and it doesn't go away when someone doesn't like our Instagram post.
Understood. And so, and where I want to go with this is that having that strong sense of self can really fortify us when we run into these narcissists,
Exactly.
because I would think that the typical narcissist, there are certain individuals that they would, I guess, prey on it, for lack of a better term, right? And
Yep.
so those that have a stronger sense of self, not to say they can't fall victim, but their bounce back ability is certainly different than someone who isn't equipped properly.
That's absolutely right. And that when we have a good, solid sense of ourselves and someone devalues us, we step back and say, what was that?
Right.
It's more like something that doesn't fit. Whereas if we don't have a good sense of ourselves, if we are in that superficial sense of self and fragile sense of self, then somebody can knock us down much more easily, and we will buy into it.
Gotcha.
So if you have those negative messages inside your own head and then someone taps into that, it rings true.
Yeah.
If you don't, if you're not living in that place inside your own head, if you're in a solid place, then when someone says that, you just go, no, thank you.
Right.
Not interested.
Yeah. So there's two different things, really depending on where you are. If you've got a strong sense of self, continue to fortify that. And if you're on the other end where you're say you fall victim to this to this situation that we're talking about, these narcissists, then there's some rebuilding that has to happen. And there's a process for that, I would imagine. Briefly, what does that look like, the rebuilding process?
Yeah, so the last several chapters of my book are all about rebuilding your sense of self. And by that, I mean really writing out the things that you really do respect about yourself and the miracle of that. I've worked with people, and typically when I ask them what they respect and like about themselves, initially their eyes glaze over and they go, nothing. But then if we talk for an hour and we talk about what's going on with them and where they came from and what their life was like as a child. And then, I can kind of come back around by the end of one session and say, look at the miracle that is you. You didn't grow up with these compassionate people in your life. You are a compassionate person. You're empathic. You're loyal. You're devoted. You're all of these wonderful qualities. And you didn't even grow up that way. That's just you. That's purely you. Yeah. And that's an amazing thing. And when somebody can kind of step back and go, yeah, that's true. It's not the same as the old Saturday Night Live skit where the guy was in the mirror going, I like myself. Because we all know that's just garbage. We don't buy into that, it's just too fake.
Right.
But when you can actually identify things that are true of you, that you know to be true, then that's a good feeling. And that's real self-esteem, and it doesn't fly by night. Yeah. And when somebody comes in and insults you with something superficial or something, it's just like, yeah, that doesn't fit. I don't like that person. So you veer away from them. Then you also have to rebuild your connectedness, because if you've been in this kind of relationship, you've been disconnected from your people. Sometimes they end up taking your people away with them when you separate from them, and that's really sad. But you can rebuild. And I often encourage people to find what you're passionate about, volunteer, find other compassionate, empathic people, and make new connections. So that's always an option. And then you also have to rebuild everything else about your life. A lot of times people don't know what they think, what they feel, what they want, what they need. So you have to rebuild all of it. And don't be surprised if you feel a tremendous sense of emptiness when you leave this relationship, because you poured so much of yourself into paying attention to them. You literally don't know how to pay attention to you.
Got to learn how to do that all over again, almost.
Yep.
Wow. There's so many layers to this, Shannon, and I'm so glad that you explain it, particularly the rebuilding aspect of it as well. Because I can see, again, we talk about sort of that helplessness feeling that people may have. It's like, well, where do I start? Where do I go? What do I do? And and then this is after still dealing with the fog, right? So you get through all that, and then it's like, now what, sort of a thing. And so I think it's really good that you frame that in a manner that makes at least people understand or aware what they need to do for themselves.
Right. And a lot of times people will get out of a relationship, and before they take the time to rebuild, they'll jump into another one thinking, oh, well, this person's better. But if you don't rebuild, you're going to tend to choose the same. And that's not a good thing. So it's really, really important that you take the time and go through the process of actually regrouping and rebuilding and figuring out what went wrong and how it happened and how to not steer down into that fog again.
Got you. This is such a great topic. I mean, on this podcast, we spend so much time talking about, how people can be more audacious in their daily living and how to live their best audacious lives ever. And some of the things that you talked about are things that normally, forget the narcissistic relationship, but you can do in your day-to-day life and still build yourself up or rebuild if need be, because that's how you get to that better place, by those either building up yourself or strengthening what you have.
Absolutely. And I love that audaciousness. That's a great word. And that's what drew me to your podcast. I just think it's awesome. And I think that sometimes people are dealing with the narcissistic relationship from way past. It could be a parent, and it could have been anybody in your life that hurt you. And now you're hurting yourself by carrying those old stories inside your own head. Right. So getting free of that, getting clear from that, it can happen even if you've been out of the relationship years and years, but you're not healed. It's really important that you take the time to heal, because you're worth it, and you've got so much to offer. And to be your audacious self, you've got to do that healing inside.
Awesome. Shannon, this has been fantastic. Really, really has. So informative, so insightful. For our listeners who want to learn more about you or get a copy of your book, and again, I made a point: get out of the fog, into the clear, journaling to help you heal from toxic relationships. Where can we send them?
nofoggydays.com or therapisttalks.com will get you to my landing page, and that's got the link to my book. It's also got the link to my YouTube channel and LinkedIn and yada yada yada.
Yeah, awesome.
All the stuff.
And I should mention that you've got a very active YouTube channel and a lot of great insights that you also share quite regularly as well. So I had an opportunity to peruse, and I was quite impressed the level of detail that you offer. So that's fantastic. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Audley. This has been really a wonderful pleasure.
Yes, it certainly has. And thank you. And certainly keep up all the great work, and take care, Shannon.
Thank you.
Back we are here on the podcast. And first off, going to send my appreciation thanks to Shannon for being here, stopping by and leaving us some really good points and strategies, again, how navigating through and getting to the other side of these narcissistic relationships. Again, her book is entitled Out of the Fog, Into the Clear, journaling to help you heal from toxic relationships. And I'd certainly encourage you to head over to her website and pick up a copy, or hey, go to Amazon, you can grab a copy there as well. When I think back to my conversation with Shannon, I appreciate so much of what she had to say, but if there's just one thing that I would take from the chat that we had, it would have to be this. Self-compassion can be instrumental in learning how to heal from traumatic events and narcissistic relationships. You might find that your first reaction is to blame yourself. It may take some time for you to stop critiquing your own behaviors that contributed to the relationship. You've got to remind yourself that how someone treats you is not your fault. Reward yourself for finally getting to a place where you can heal and get out of a particular situation. Recognize the signs that you're healing from a narcissistic abuse as you see them. And above all, be proud of how far you've come. One day that day will come where you're able to forgive yourself instead of judging yourself for the past. It might help to create some mantras to use when you start to feel yourself getting down. Remembering that you're strong, that you deserve love, and that you're brave for getting out of that particular situation. It can all help you heal and get to the better place and allow you to be able to live that best audacious life that we talk about here. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so simply by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com, enter in your email address, and you'll be alerted every time we've got brand new content that comes out. We've sadly reached the end of another episode of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. And as always, I send a shout out and thanks to our amazing listeners, who are those lovers of Audacious, for constantly and tremendously providing such incredible support. It's always so much appreciated. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.